Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you to this session of our Islam Study Circle. Before we begin, I must let you know that from next week our times will change, and starting from next week on Saturdays, the starting time of this class would be 7 p.m. Pakistan Standard Time. So please make a note of this. It's 7 p.m. Pakistan Standard Time. The Quranic verses that we are going to discuss today actually are two surahs of the Quran, the last two surahs of the Quran, which are also called the Mu'awwizatain. And they are called the Mu'awwizatain because through them we seek refuge with the Almighty from all kinds of harms and sufferings of things that we find around us. These two surahs also help us in combating all forms of unknown evils and harms that might come our way, which include the evil eye, which include sorcery, magic, and all kinds of occult sciences and occult disciplines. The translation of these verses is, before I actually read the translation, let me read out the two surahs to you also. So it reads, قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد. And then the next surah, قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. Pray, I seek refuge with the Lord who breaks apart and brings forth everything, from the evil of all that He has created, from the evil of darkness when it overspreads, and from the evil of those who blow on knots, and from the evil of every envious person when he envies. The second surah, which is Surah Nas, its translation is, Pray, I seek refuge with the Lord of mankind, the sovereign of mankind, the God of mankind, from the evil of the prompter of vice who withdraws after his prompting, who prompts evil suggestions in the hearts of people, and is from among the jinn and mankind. So viewers, you can clearly see the words which are common to both of these surahs are a'uz. A'uz means that I seek refuge. And in the first surah, you can see that the word shar is repeated a lot of times, and here it needs to be understood that the word shar, or evil as it is translated, actually refers to the harms and sufferings and calamities that are rampant on the planet Earth and which we as human beings come across. So it's not that the Almighty has created evil per se. The thing is that these harms and sufferings, as far as natural phenomena are concerned, of course, they are a form of trial and test. But as far as human beings are concerned and other people are concerned, it is through their ill use of certain disciplines that they are blessed with that evil and harm comes into being. So it's like seeking refuge with the Almighty from all kinds of harms and sufferings and evils which people and calamities may produce. And especially here, we can clearly see that there is a general encompassing when it says that min sharri ma khalaq, from the evil of all that the Almighty has created, which means the sufferings of all the phenomena that He has created. We seek refuge with Him. And especially what is mentioned later is min sharri ghasiqin iza waqab, that when darkness overspreads. And we know that most of the evil and most of the harms that come into being of course, in previous cultures and even today, are the harms and sufferings which come into play at night. And because of the fact that darkness is something which covers up a lot of things and is instrumental in hiding a lot of things, and at times we don't know what these things are. So there is a general word, or a general wording is used that, oh God, we seek refuge from the darkness of the night when it overspreads. And then, of course, this magic and sorcery, which was rampant in the time of the Prophet, when they actually found out that the forces of Islam were gaining momentum and they were being acknowledged all around, and the faith of Islam was growing, one of the things that they resorted to, in particular the Jews of Arabia, that they tried to resort to sorcery and magic to stall the message of Islam. And for this, of course, we know that one of the areas in which this magic and sorcery is practiced, and the way it is practiced, is that certain chants are actually made and tied, and then they are blown upon knots, and certain things are uttered. And finally, it is said, "Min sharri hasidin iza hasad," that from the evil of every envious person when he envies. Here again, we know that when people start to envy, they do all sorts of things and all sorts of covert things, and these covert things and these hidden and clandestine things, of course, do not come into our knowledge. We know that people who become jealous and people who are extremely envious of other people, they indulge in all sorts of activities. And this actually, if you place this in context, as I said earlier on, that in the times of the prophetic mission, these two surahs were revealed right after migration in Medina, when the forces of evil had launched an all-out offensive through magic and sorcery, some of the things that they resorted to, and of course jealousy and envy, so that they could stop this message from spreading. And of course, because of the fact that this also has a general appeal, and we can clearly see that whenever we are faced with situations in which we find ourselves overcome by unknown forces or something that we are not able to explain, then we seek refuge from God. So the word falak actually is something which can be translated best as one who breaks apart. So Rabbil Falak is the Lord of one who breaks apart. And of course, when he breaks apart and brings forth things, then he is the person who creates everything. Falak is a process in which things are torn apart and something new is created. So the dawn is created from the crack of dawn appears from this night. We see the seed as it cracks. We see a new life coming into being, and same is the case with a human being. So it's the Lord of everyone the Lord who breaks forth and brings apart things, with whom we need to seek this refuge. The second surah is also of similar sort, and in this we find that there is a persistent element of appeal in the first three verses when it is said Rabbin Nas, Malikin Nas, Ilahin Nas, invoking these attributes of God, and specifically the main enemy of mankind, who is Satan. From him this refuge is sought with the Almighty, and it says bin sharril waswasil khannas. It says the prompter of vice who withdraws. Waswas means a person who, of course, prompts evil, and here refers to Satan. And khannas is someone who, once given this suggestion, who once putting this suggestion on the people, he suddenly draws away, and it is as if he would not like to bear the responsibility of the consequences. So he is a person who, out of his own, who plays a prank, he whispers and then disappears from sight, so that no one can blame him. So khannas here actually means a person who, or Satan in fact, to be precise here, who whispers these evil prompts in the hearts of men, as is evident from the very next verse, allazi yuwaswisu fi sudurin nas. And these such kind of Satans or devils are found both among men and in jinn kind. They prompt evil suggestions in the hearts of people. And from here it can also be understood that as far as the ambit of Satan and of course other of his followers and progeny are concerned, it's not that they can forcibly lead mankind away or they can force them into evil. All they can do is to whisper evil suggestions. They can allure you, they can entice you, but it is us who then have the choice either to be led away or to refuse this enticement. So one of the things that we need to understand is that it's not that God has left us to the mercy of Satan and devils. It's not the case. It's that God has given this will to us, this freedom of will which we can exercise. We can dismiss these allurements, we can dismiss these enticements of Satan and the devils, and at the same time we can fall for them. So this is also one of the important areas that we need to understand, that there are people who ask that why did God create Satan, and why is it that he gives him so much power that he leads us astray. No, it's not the case that he leads us astray. He suggests to us evil ways, he suggests all kinds of bad things, and of course this is one way of God testing our mettle and checking us whether we are led astray or not. And remember, this going astray is something which is in our own it's in our own authority and discretion. It's we who can succumb to these desires, and it is we who can control these things. So in this second surah is also very important. It tells us that how we can seek refuge from people who try to entice and allure us to bad things. So we now go on to the next part of our study circle, and this is the hadith of the day, and this is taken from Al-Jami al-Sahih of Imam Muslim. It is reported by Anas ibn Malik, and the words are: Anas ibn Malik يقول قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يتبع الميت ثلاثة فيرجع اثنان ويبقى واحد يتبعه أهله وماله وعمله فيرجع أهله وماله ويبقى عمله. So Anas ibn Malik reported from God's messenger, reported that God's messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam stated, three things follow a deceased in his funeral procession, and two of them return, and one remains with him. His family, his wealth, and his deeds follow him. So these are the three things which follow him. The family and the wealth return, and he is left with the deeds only. So the thing which is underscored here by the Prophet is that as far as our journey to the hereafter is concerned, we have to be very, very alert in this regard, because the only wealth and the only treasure we will have in the hereafter is the treasure of our good deeds. When we walk in our funeral procession, or when people walk us in our funeral procession, we will have people carrying us or are carrying our dead body. We will have the wealth, of course, still there, and we will have our good deeds. So it's like a portrait being picturized here, that we go to the grave with three things, but when we stay there, when we stay in our grave or we are consigned to the grave, the only thing that remains with us is our good deeds. And this is to emphasize the fact that it is the good deeds that are going to count in the hereafter. Whatever wealth we may have earned, however much family we may have created or produced, nothing is going to help us in the hereafter. Our closest of relatives will run away from us because they have to contend with their own account. And the wealth that we may have amassed will have absolutely no use for us, because that wealth again is, if it is ill spent and not spent in the proper way, is going to go against us. The only thing that will go with us is our good deeds, is the things that we did, the good terms that we did to others. If we were sympathetic, if we were compassionate, if we were kind, if we had a large heart, if we were generous, if we were not rude to other people. So all these human things, all these humane ways which as human beings we ought to follow, are the ones which are going to really be of any use in the hereafter. So it's like stressing that only good deeds are going to count in the hereafter, nothing else. And of course it's meant to caution and prod people who are after materialism or materialistic things in life. They are in a dash and a race to gather as much as they can, without realizing that they have certain obligations, they have certain responsibilities, and these obligations and responsibilities, if they are not paid attention to, then what we can see is that a person is going to lose in the hereafter. He or she will not be able to contend and of course face the Almighty and be successful in the hereafter. So let us make this a point in our lives, that not only we will try to do good deeds, but also as parents we will transfer this legacy of good deeds to our next in kin, to our progeny, to our family, so that when they grow up and so that when they become conscious of conscious living, they are able to understand that the real life that awaits us is the life hereafter, and success in the hereafter depends on what good we have done to other people and how we have cared about other people. So let this be a legacy. Let this be the real focal point with which people can remember us when we pass away, that we cared about other human beings, and let this be the inspirational point with which we can actually inspire and motivate the next generation, because it's not only we that we are living for. We have to understand that all that we do is transferred and passed on to our next generation. Our own children see us, and if they see us doing good deeds towards other people, they will follow us, and thereby this torch of humanity will continue to shine. So we now come to the third part of our study circle, and this is the Bible verse of the day. In fact, this is more than one verse. These are actually 5 or 6 verses. They are taken from the Gospel of St. Luke, and I have titled these verses as Jesus Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam on self-righteousness. And he made this story for some people who were certain that they were good and had a low opinion of others. 2 men went to the temple for prayer, one a Pharisee and the other a tax farmer. The Pharisee, taking up his position, said to himself these words: God, I give you praise, because I am not like other men who take more than their right, who are evildoers, who are untrue to their wives, or even like this tax farmer. Twice in the week I go without food. I give 1/10 of all I have. The tax farmer, on the other hand, keeping far away and not lifting up even his eyes to heaven, made signs of grief and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I say to you, this man went back to his house with God's approval, and not the other. For everyone who makes himself high will be made low, and whoever makes himself low will be made high. So clearly you can see that the message which Jesus is giving us is that when a person starts to blow his own trumpet and he starts to believe that he is on the right track and he is a self-righteous person, and he starts to brag about all his deeds, and he wants to show off that this is how he has been conducting his life, and not only that, he actually condemns other people and tells them that this is how they are behaving, and this is how I am behaving. So you can see this comparison between the Pharisee and the tax farmer. The Pharisee is telling everyone what he has been doing, and of course because of the fact that this is something just happening in the temple, in the prayer, so the Pharisee has said that these were the words that he actually spoke to God, that he praised him and said that he is a person who was not an evildoer, who was not untrue to his wife, and he is not like this tax farmer who was, of course, standing beside him. And he even tells the Lord that he fasts and he gives his zakat dues as well. But the tax farmer, on the other hand, when his turn came to pray to the Almighty, he just confessed and said that, God, have mercy on me, I am a sinner. I have done all kinds of... He never showed off, he never told what he had done like the Pharisee had done. And we can see how Jesus commented on both of them. And he said that this man went back to his house with God's approval, and not the other one. These last lines are actually worth noting. For everyone who makes himself high will be made low, and whoever makes himself low will be made high. So this is what the message of Jesus that we continuously hear in the Gospels is, that a person who tries to overawe others by his or her own personality and tells others who he is disliked by God. God likes humble people who are down to earth, who do not show off, who are not pompous. And when it is said that people who are low will be made high, the actual purport of Jesus is they're people who are down to earth, who are humble, who never brag, who are never pompous, who are never ostentatious. They will be celebrated by the Lord and made high. So those who pose to be such as if they are superior, the Almighty will certainly take them to account. So humility is something that we must always adhere to. And of course, we have to be careful that it should not be false humility, because the extreme form of humility, or I would say when one crosses the limit in humility, one ends up with false humility, which should not be the case. Humility is that we acknowledge that we are human beings who can make mistakes, and the only superior being who can never make a mistake is God Almighty, and we have to always remain in our own shell. And when I say that in our own shell, I mean that we have to acknowledge that we are people who can always make mistakes. And the best way to remain humble, or one of the ways that can make us remain humble, is that we always keep an eye on our shortcomings. So if we keep an eye on our shortcomings, we will always realize that we are people who are, of course, not perfect, and hence we should not show off ourselves. But on the other hand, if we always keep a focus on our good points, there is a chance that we might be led astray and we would brag and show off. And another thing which can help us in remaining humble is that we take the lead in greeting people whenever we meet them. We stick out our hand to meet them. We try our best to be the first ones to greet other people, and especially people who might be our so-called rivals in life, or maybe who are jealous of us, or maybe who are not good in their attitude towards us. Let's be even more good to them. Let's come forward to them and make it a point to acknowledge them and to welcome them in our gatherings and to greet them. This keeps us humble. This makes us, this gives us this feeling that as human beings we have our own share of faults. If other people have faults, we have our own set of faults. So let us concentrate more on our faults. Another thing which makes us humble and keeps us in the right place is that let us stop claiming credit of a lot of good things that we do. If we have to claim this credit, let it be before God alone. Instead of telling other people the good and the righteous things that we have done. This again is a double-edged sword, because at times you say these things without meaning to show off, but you never know when your inner self starts to prompt you and you start showing off. So it's a double-edged sword. We have to be careful about it. So it is something, if we can stop claiming credit of the things that we do, this is something which makes us realize that a lot of things that we do are not simply because we have done them, but because the circumstances were such that the circumstances became conducive to our good deeds, and the Almighty blessed us with a lot of urge to do them, and of course the circumstances were such that we were able to do them. So there's a lot of blessing from the Almighty involved. And then of course there are other factors in which the Almighty blesses certain people with innate abilities. People are very intelligent, they are super intelligent, they have other abilities because they are God gifted, and not everyone is God gifted. So again, we have to realize that a lot of things that we have that we might brag about are things that we have not earned. They are in fact a gift of God, and because of the fact that they are a gift of God, we have to be very humble, and we have also to realize this fact that if God has given us certain things, He can take them away also anytime, and it just needs a very small moment of time. It's in a fraction of time that we might end up losing a lot that we might have had. We could be inflicted with sickness, which actually does away with a lot of mental ability that we might be having. He could inflict us with certain calamities which could destroy our earnings and our wealth, and this can all happen in the wink of an eye, in the blink of an eye. And I think that if we have eyes which can really see, which has insight, we can see so many cases around us in which people have ended up in a lot of bother in spite of being at the top of the world in their own times. So we come to the last part of our study circle now, and this is the discussion topic of the day, and this is the topic that we're going to discuss today is becoming more regular in our prayers. So of course, as we all know that the Almighty has ordained us the 5 prayers. He wants us to be regularly in touch with Him, express our gratitude, and to remember Him. And one of the things that makes us irregular in prayer is because of the fact that it's a habit that we need to form. And when we start off with praying and of course coming to attention 5 times a day, at times it's difficult in old age. Of course, when we are young and our parents and our teachers have taken the pains of making us regular, that's a big boon and a blessing. But when we are adults, when we grow up, the question arises that what can make us more regular in prayer? So a couple of tips might help in this regard. Firstly, I always suggest that start off with just one prayer, any one of the five which are easier for us to offer, and gradually add the second and the third and the fourth, because as you enjoy your first prayer, it'll automatically urge you to adopt the next one. And how can you enjoy your prayer? You can enjoy your prayer by understanding what you say to the Almighty. Make it a means of connecting with the Almighty. If we think that this is a time in which we can speak to God and we can actually spiritually elevate ourselves and understand what we are speaking to God about, it can really lift us up. And this can, of course, make us even more motivated to offer the next prayer. And I often also say this, that we should try to learn the Quran as much as we can by heart, especially the last portion of the Quran, which has shorter surahs, so that we can recite the surahs in a variety of in various prayer rakats, so that it's not just a couple of surahs that we recite and which are in our heart. Because you see, the more we recite, the more variety we have in our mind regarding the Quran, the more involved we will be in the prayer. And in fact, if we take it upon ourselves to memorize a small portion of the Quran every day, maybe half a ayah or maybe an ayah, we will realize that in a very short span of time we have a lot of verses in our mind. And if we also understand what these verses mean, we will of course have a lot at our disposal to read in the prayer, and this will make our prayers to be enjoyable. And also remember, it's not just the utterances of the prayer, it's the posture of the prayer also that we must enjoy. Imagine the relief and the spiritual enhancement that we can get when we are in prostration. Just drench yourselves and embrace yourselves and feel that you are closest to God, because you have placed your highest point, which is your forehead, on the floor before the Supreme Being. And this gives you a feeling of humility and acknowledgement of greatness of the Almighty. So the postures of the prayer are also important. So when you kneel before the Almighty, kneeling again is a sign of respect. When you stand before the Almighty by tying your hands, we also have this feeling of respect. So it's a question of consciously realizing that not only the utterances of the prayer, but the posture of the prayer is very important as well. When we prostrate, when we sit up, when we stand up, when we kneel, when we sit in the last rakats for a longer period of time, all these are basically postures which are meant to acknowledge the greatness of the Almighty in some way or the other. So we have to be more conscious not only to the utterances that we actually speak in the prayer, but also to the various postures, because they too are expressions of our humility, they are expressions of our connectivity to the Almighty. So these are some of the tips that perhaps can be adopted and make the prayer more comfortable. And one last thing that I would also like to add here is that that one thing that can make us even more regular in prayer is that initially we offer the farz rakat only, the obligatory rakat, which are of course 2 of Fajr, 4 of Zohr, 4 of Asr, 3 of Maghrib and 4 of Isha. This is all that the prayer is as far as the mandatory part is concerned. The rest are all nafil, the rest are all optional. If we have the time, if we have the mental space, we can of course offer them and earn reward from the Almighty. But the farz rakat are the ones that perhaps we should start from, and they are so little in number, they are so few in number, and we can clearly see that if we add up all these farz rakat, they are hardly 20 minutes of our time in these 24 hours, which is of course nothing compared to the whole expanse of a day and night. So these are some of the things that I wanted to communicate as far as becoming more regular in our prayers is concerned. So now I would like to commence our question answer session. So if you have any questions, please raise your hands and I can just unmute your mic. So please go ahead, Yasin Fahad.
Hear me, sir?
Yes, I can hear you.
I have a question about the evil eye. Is it just a concept or is it something that actually exists?
Well, it does exist. It's a psychological phenomena, and for such phenomenon, we have this term which is called psychosomatic phenomena, in which physical things have a psychological effect. So, for example, when you praise someone, he or she starts to blush. Now, what has happened is that your words have transformed and worked something in the psyche of the other person, and of course brought up something, a physical change in that, or a psychological change in that person. So evil eye also is, in all probability, is a phenomena in which when you look longingly or yearning towards other people. It could be out of jealousy, it could be out of envy, it could be out of praise even, though it can have certain effects on the person on whom this praise is showered. And remember that, of course, as far as evil eye is concerned, or magic, or some things which are similar, the alternative that we have to combat such things is, we've just discussed them, that Surah Falak and Surah Nas, which are the last two surahs of the Quran, they are the best antidote for such things. And because such things can happen every now and then, so it is best to always keep reciting them. And besides these two surahs, we have some other supplications which the Prophet has taught us, which are equally, of course, effective, and which the words of such supplications are that we bring ourselves in the refuge of the Almighty, and we think that if all physical ailments have been ruled out and there is nothing which physically ails us, and the doctors also clear us, and in spite of that we feel as if we have something in ourselves that we cannot explain, which is inexplicable, then of course this could be one of the reasons. And for this, as I said, that it is best to keep reciting these last two surahs, as well as some of the supplications which the Prophet has taught us.
So sir, I understand sometimes we do have situations where we don't understand why things are happening. Like, we are trying to control ourselves and everything, and then the mind does goes towards this, that maybe, there has been an evil eye. And like for me, I have these surah recitations a part of my regular life. I do them after every prayer every single day. But it's still these things happen, and you have no reason why you are behaving in a certain way or what's happening to you. So anything else that we can do about it? Like I already do the surahs part of my regular routine, but the other du'as that you're referring to, where can I find them?
So there are several du'as. You'll find them in a lot of anthologies of prayers, and if you would like, I can, maybe if you can email me your address, I can send you some of these du'as. And one other thing that you can do is that remain in ceremonial ablution as far as you can. So if you are in wuzu, and every time your wuzu breaks, do a fresh wuzu. And because this state of ritual purity is again something which always helps. It because of the fact that it makes you ritually pure and ceremonially pure, we do think that evil always finds this a big hindrance, because as we know from some of the I would say insinuations of Satan and jinn and their whereabouts, that they thrive on dirty places, or thrive in dirty places at times. Not all the jinn, but certain evil spirits. So one of the things which can be suggested is that we remain in the state of ceremonial ablution as far as we can.
Thank you, sir.
So we have Tehseen. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum.
One question about Safar namaz, that as we know that the first namaz will be half like the Zuhr and Asr. What about the Witr Wajib? Should we skip the Witr Wajib?
So the Witr itself is an optional prayer. It's the Hanafites which call it a Wajib prayer. The Prophet never did. So the only prayer that you need to offer is the Farz prayer, and you have to half it, except the Maghrib, of course, which remains as its original rakat. As far as all other types of prayers are concerned, whether they are Sunnah or Witr or Nafil, they no need to be offered. Even in normal cases, in normal circumstances, when you're not in a journey, even then they are Nafil. So when you are in a journey, the obligatory part of the prayer is halved. As far as the optional part of the prayer is concerned, it's entirely your prerogative. If you feel like praying the optional part, it's up to you, just as it is up to you to offer the optional part when you are not on a journey. So as far as the optional part is concerned, it's entirely up to you in both situations. But the obligatory part, which is the first part, that is halved. And of course, the 2 rakats are not halved. For example, the Fajr still remains to be 2 rakat, and the 3 rakat, which is the Maghrib prayer, that also remains to be 3. The rest, which is the Zohar, the Asr, and the Isha, which has 4 rakats of first prayer, it is these prayers which are halved, the first rakats.
One more question regarding the Safar prayer as well. I gather that Allah has given this permission to reduce it because of the hardship of traveling. But nowadays, if you look at the way we do travel and then we stay in hotels which are all comfortable, what should we do in those situations? I mean, if we are comfortable before traveling, do we still have to do it, or we can just do it first?
Right. So you see, this is a concession which is given in certain circumstances, and the circumstances are if we feel this discomfort and hardship in traveling. However, if this discomfort is not felt and we don't feel this journey to be discomforting and creating any hardships, we should of course pray the full prayer, because the concession is something which relates to discomfort. And if there is no discomfort, then we should not avail this concession, because it was never meant for that purpose. It was only meant when we go through this hardship and this discomfort. And also, I would like to add that this could vary from person to person. For example, there could be a journey which can tire you and not your brother or your friend, and vice versa as well. So it's basically a personal choice. And of course, the time, the society that you live in, the conveyance that you have, the circumstances, the weather, there are so many things which come into play, and the resilience of a person also. So there are people who are tough, there are people who are not that tough. So you see, all these variables are so many that we cannot have a rule of thumb for every person. And so each person has to decide his or her own situation, keeping in mind the basic principle.
Okay, I got this point about the circumstances. Sometimes it could be not that comfortable, so you can still pray.
Right.
Some people say, well, when Allah has already said to have given you this order,
right? So you should right.
Then why you changing it?
So you see, you have to tell these people that God has given this concession because of certain circumstances. If those circumstances are no longer there, the concession is not there. The concession is conditional. So if those conditions no longer prevail, we have to tell them that the concession was not meant for those circumstances. So because they don't realize that, they think that this concession is in all circumstances, whether the journey is comfortable or not comfortable. It's a question of the journey. They have to be told that it's not the journey which is the cause of this qasr. It is the discomfort in the journey. So there is this depth involved. It's not the journey itself, but the discomfort and the hardship of the journey, which is the cause of the concession. Because they don't think that it's the hardship, they generally think it's the travel itself, and they count this travel, or they measure this travel by the number of miles or kilometers. This is the reason that they think that we have to avail the concession.
Okay, thank you very much.
So I think that we don't have any further questions, and with this reminder that from next week, which is next Saturday, inshallah, the 2nd of November, the class from next week would be at 7 p.m. the Pakistan Standard Time, and you can calculate the time for your own territories and your own countries, keeping in view that it would be 7 p.m. inshallah next week, Pakistan Standard Time. So until then, it is Khuda Hafiz and goodbye.
Allah.